Hi, this review is a little bit different. It is for Winnie-the-Pooh by A A Milne. And this is a kid's book and it's a very, very beloved one. So Winnie-the-Pooh is iconic and completely pervasive imagery and story. I don't remember ever having read this as a kid. But one of its co-creators, so A A Milne wrote the story, but the E.H. Shepard, here on the back of my copy, created the illustrations, without which maybe Winnie-the-Pooh would never have been quite what it was. Here's some beauties of Eeyore. Eeyore was a great character. And somewhere here you've got one of those iconic Pooh-Bear ones with balloons and honey. Here's an opening one of Christopher Robin carrying Pooh-Bear down the stairs. So, A. Milne created this book for his son, Christopher Robin Milne, in the 20s. So we're talking about just about 10 years after the Edwardian era is thought to have ended. And I think that's important because the Victorian and later the Edwardian eras were known to have made children a very sentimental, innocent image that previously children hadn't really, as I understood it, possessed. But throughout the Victorian and Edwardian, children were almost idealized or idolized as these incredibly sweet, innocent beings, and the literature that followed, that was created for them in those eras, followed the whole thing. Songs of innocence, pink and blue frills, etc. And I don't know how many people have actually tried to read this as adults, but it is almost impossibly sweet and innocent. So Christopher Robin, the illustrations of him are incredibly sweet and innocent and quite girl-like. It's like, I don't think most modern readers seeing these images would realize that Christopher Robin was actually an image of a boy, of a little boy. I think he was 4 or 6 when these started to be published. And it's a fascinating story. So Christopher Robin had a toy bear. It was Edward Bear, which he got from Harrods, back when Harrods was owned by different people, one assumes. No politics. And also there was a bear called, I think, Winnipeg or Winifred at the local London Zoo. And between those things, Edward Bear became Winnie and the Pooh slipped in there somewhere. So these stories are written by an adult telling a child a story. Now, the adult point of view is, again, innocent and sweet and naive. And the boy, the fictionalized version of Christopher Robin, who's hearing the stories, is pretending they're not for him because he remembers all this. They're for Pooh-Bear, who doesn't, who is a very silly bear. And they are small adventures, and they're based in 100 Mile Wood, I think it is. And the wood in question is a real wood just outside London. So Milne and his family were Londoners, but they had a summer cottage just outside London near 100 Mile Wood, I think it was. And that translated to, is it 8 Mile Wood? In which they all live in the book. Oh, so regarding the illustrations by Shepard, which are stunning, and I really don't think that without Shepard's illustrations, this book would ever have achieved the mass success and recognition that it has. In the introduction here, it says, by decorations. Not illustrations, decorations. I didn't think this one through. Decorations by E.H. Shepard. E.H. Shepard also illustrated The Wind in the Willows, which was one of my childhood books. And exactly why Winnie-the-Pooh is ubiquitous and The Wind in the Willows is almost forgotten is one of those things that I don't quite get. I haven't met many people in the last few decades who have even know what The Wind in the Willows is, let alone have read it. Everyone knows Winnie-the-Pooh. I recently went into a geek shop. I was looking for singlets or tank tops or whatever you call them in your part of the world, because it's summer here and it's hot. I couldn't find one, but among the dozen or so available illustrations in the shop was a Winnie-the-Pooh. Ubiquitous, everywhere. Everyone knows it, but do they? Because I don't know how many people have actually read that. These are sweet little adventures based on Christopher Robin's toys, and they wander around the wood and they talk to each other, and Pooh-Bear tries to get honey from the bees in a tree, which doesn't end well, and they all go looking for the North Pole. It's Christopher Robin's instigation, but Christopher Robin doesn't really know what the North Pole is, so when they find a pole, they decide that's the North Pole. Small childhood adventures told in a very sweet, innocent way that manages not quite to be saccharine. I don't actually know how many small children this would actually appeal to. I suppose there are some very naive and innocent children out there, but I think that most children these days would probably be a little bit too worldwide weary, perhaps even a little bit too advanced to consider this interesting. I think they would not be as interested in it maybe as adults would be. So, Ashdown Forest is the setting of the stories. That's what my computer tells me. Now, funnily enough, Milne had had a previous, quite an extensive career. He'd written a lot of screenplays and a lot of plays and screen scripts. Oh, God. You know what I mean. Scripts for plays. And he'd also written a few other novels. I think he had 7 novels in total. He'd written for Punch a lot, so he had a lot of articles. He had a lot of cred in writer terms, especially from before the war. But after he published the children's books, he became largely known for them, and it was a source of considerable annoyance to him. Up until then, he'd been able to write whatever he wanted to, and he'd found an audience every time he changed direction. But once Winnie-the-Pooh, The House at Pooh Corner, and When We Were Very Young were published, after that he became known as a children's author, which I don't think he was that keen on. Now, there was one interesting thing that Wikipedia says. I don't know how true it is, but I'm going to assume that they did their due diligence. And a reason why he stopped writing more children's books, one was that Christopher Robin was actually growing a bit older, but especially about Winnie-the-Pooh, was he felt amazement and disgust over the immense fame that his son was exposed to. And he said, "I feel that the legal Christopher Robin has already had more publicity than I want for him. I do not wish him to ever regret his name," or something similar to that. Now, interestingly enough, Milne later adapted The Wind in the Willows, which was illustrated also by Shepard, into a play. So A A Milne had this fame, and Winnie-the-Pooh did too. I feel that a good reason why there's still this immense amount of Winnie-the-Pooh fame is not so much the original books, but eventually this book, The Tale of Pooh, was published by an American author who was trying to use the characters and the adventures from the Winnie-the-Pooh stories to illustrate Taoism. Now, I did try to read that book many years ago. It did my head in. First of all, because I wasn't that familiar with the Pooh-Bear characters anyway, but also because I just wanted to learn about Taoism. I didn't need a kid's book to tell me about it. I just wanted to read about the thing. However, it was very famous. It was a bestseller. It was on all sorts of lists. And I think that might be the reason why Winnie-the-Pooh is now ubiquitous, when so many other excellent stories, including The Wind in the Willows, children's stories, have gone by the by. Now, the illustrations in this are gorgeous, but there's plenty of other books that have had gorgeous illustrations, like the Narnia books, that don't have the same worldwide recognition. So, anyway, there's a few thoughts on Winnie-the-Pooh. I read this not as a primary book. It's a little bit too young and a little bit too romanticized, childish for me. I had to read it a bit at a time, almost like bedtime stories. They're quite suitable to bedtime stories. There's actually a kangaroo toy in here called Kanga with their baby called Roo. For added benefit. Yes, anyway, interesting book, more in terms of the social popular reference that it's become rather than the actual book. I like reading children's books. There's a few other pretty innocent, pretty naive ones that I've read. The ubiquity of the Pooh-Bear image, though, that's a fascinating thing that I don't quite understand. I did a bit of internet research before doing this review. The internet can't tell me why it's as famous as it is. It might have been partly because Disney got a hold of it. That always accelerates things, or it used to accelerate things when Disney made movies. But still, Pooh-Bear, ubiquitous character. I don't understand why. If you do, I would love to hear from you. If you read this as a kid and loved it, also would like to hear from you. If you read this as a kid, or if you recently read it to a child and felt that it was out of step with the times, I'm really interested to hear your views on it, because I'm still wondering over this one. Incidentally, my copy came off a $2 table and it is in pretty terrible condition. And I'm divided. Also, the adventure where they all had a flood and nearly drowned is missing a page. So I never actually found out how the flood story ended. I'll have to go to the library and find out. My dilemma about Winnie-the-Pooh by A A Milne right now is I feel like this book is in terrible condition and I shouldn't keep it. There isn't a lot of room on my bookshelf. They're starting to need a new bookshelf. On the other hand, I also feel that I'm probably going to want to read it again in maybe 4 or 5 years. Previous experience suggests if I get rid of a book, next time I want to read it, I can't. In further plot development, I happen to know that a new second-hand bookshop that has opened down the road has a copy of this in much better condition and presumably with all its pages. Do I go and purchase that book? Do I keep this book? The dilemmas of an omnivorous reader and book collector. I have accepted the fact that I am officially a book collector. Have a great day. Read good books, maybe even children's books. Maybe even Pooh-Bear books. But in any case, have a great read.